Welcome to Malifaux University. 950. Neverborn Starter Box. If you're a player new to Malifaux, you may have received a great deal of information and advice about which faction is best for beginners, which master or keyword wins the most tournaments, and more. This information is largely opinionated and will change rapidly over time. So at Malifaux University, we still recommend you look at the basic lore of the game and factions available on the Wyrd website and follow the rule of cool. That is, whatever looks cool, feels cool, or makes you say, "Oh, cool," is the faction you should play, because you'll enjoy it the most, and that's ultimately the point of the game. Each faction has a starter box with 4 models. The soulstone cost of the individual models will vary, but the entire crew will add up to 25 soulstones, which is perfect for a small game. The starter box also contains a unique faction-themed fate deck, 10 scheme markers with the faction's logo, a measuring widget, and all the general upgrades available to your faction. Let's talk about each of these before we get to the models. This fate deck, while themed for the faction, is not the same as the regular faction fate deck you can purchase separately in the Wyrd store. This one is unique to the starter box, which is pretty cool. These are paper cards, which means they're not necessarily the most durable, and if they get wet, they will take damage. If you'd like to make them last, you can buy standard size card sleeves from your friendly local game store in a variety of colors and styles. Just keep in mind that once you sleeve your cards, you won't shuffle them like a regular deck of cards. You'll blend the halves of the deck from the side 5 to 7 times. If you shuffle them normally, you'll put creases in the sides of the sleeves and kinda wreck them. A cardstock sheet has 10 scheme markers and the measuring widget. Punch them out carefully so you don't tear the design. These scheme markers do not need to go on plastic bases. They're already 30mm across and ready for the table. You can use these with any crew in this faction you later decide to build. If you play against someone else with a crew in the same faction, you'll need to distinguish your scheme markers from his somehow, maybe by putting a coin on top of yours. The measuring widget is a fantastic tool that can stand in place of a measuring tape in most situations. It has 1, 2, 3, and 6-inch sides. If you place the tool between 2 models, it makes it easy to tell if they're within 1 or 2 inches for engagement. If you need to measure an odd number like 5 inches, just lay down the 3-inch side of the widget, then rock it around the 2-inch corner, like so. You'll also notice it has a 50mm cutout. This is a surrogate blast marker. If you're unfamiliar, some game effects have this symbol, and when it appears, a model might suffer blast damage. You determine that by placing a 50mm base over the area, usually in base contact with the original target model, and any models within the 50mm blast area are affected. You can use this widget to measure that 50mm diameter without having to place a 50mm base on the table. Watch video 209 for detailed instructions on how to handle blast markers and damage. In the plastic sleeve with all the model stat cards are the general upgrades allowable by your faction. You can add these to your models before the game when you're hiring your crew with certain restrictions. Each upgrade adds abilities, actions, or both, so you might want to hold off on using them when you're first starting out. Once you get the hang of your models as they are, then switch things up with an upgrade or 2. Later, when you're building other crews led by master models, you can still use these upgrades with other models in the same faction. Check out video 406 for detailed instructions on how to use upgrades. The models in the starter box are all pre-assembled. This means they are all molded at the factory and are each a single piece, so no assembly or other tools are required. The only thing you'll need to do is glue them onto their included bases. Check the base size on the bottom of the back of each stat card to make sure you put each model on the right base. You could use regular white glue, also called PVA glue, but you'll find it doesn't hold very well for long. Most players will use plastic glue to fuse the models to the bases, but this works only if it's plastic to plastic. If you create thematic bases out of cardstock, cork, wallpaper, or anything else, you'll probably have to use superglue. You'll have to forgive me for not having all the photos of the models in progress as I have in the other videos so far. I bought the Neverborn Starter Box a couple of years ago so I could have the red cap models for my Widow Weaver to summon, which, by the way, was really cool to have happen. But since this box is presently out of stock everywhere on Earth, we have to make do with what I have on hand, which is fully painted red caps. You'll see that Klaus Norwood's tiny feet do not naturally hold him up. I don't know if it will be the same on every model, but the right foot on my Klaus is raised a little as if he were tapping his toe. You'll want to put a generous dab of glue on his feet to make sure they make a solid bond with the base. Hold him steady for at least 30 seconds before leaving him in a safe place to dry for 24 hours. Hildegard, on the other hand, has an enormous dress that exceeds her 30mm base size. Ideally, you'll cover this part of her dress with glue and put her far towards the edge of her base, holding her for 30 seconds like Klaus. Once that passes, prop the back end of her dress up against something for the next 24 hours so she doesn't rock back and break the glue weld. The two red caps are a bit of a blend of Klaus and Hildegard when it comes to gluing. They both have tiny little feet, little peg legs really, and an enormous swoosh from their sickles. The swooshes need to be your focus for gluing, with the feet as minor supporting points. The swooshes will extend beyond their bases, which is fine, but try to get as much of the model over the base as possible for ease of playing, and to reduce the risk of something snagging the model and snapping it off the base. Once you have the models on their bases, you could put them on the table and get right to playing. When you can, though, you'll want to paint them according to your own unique style and preference. You might feel like you're not very good at painting models, but it's a skill that takes practice, and there are no better models to start on than your starter box models. There are countless YouTube channels, live streams, and other resources available to teach you how to paint, so we won't repeat that information here. Painting Klaus and Hildegard was pretty straightforward, though his shirt and tie are hidden behind his book, and Hildegard's face is behind her fan, but it only has to look good at arm's length, so feel free to skip the details if you're not ready for ultra-fine detail painting. For me, Klaus snapped off his base while I was painting him, and I did wind up putting a pin through the base into his foot to secure him once I was done painting, so you may want to do that before you paint yours. Painting the red caps can be a little challenging if you go for every little detail. Especially if you're just starting out, give yourself permission to keep them simple. You'll need to pick a color of wood for their bodies and probably a different shade for the handle of the sickle. The art on the card shows them with a white head, so you might go that route, and if you look closely, you'll see each one does have two button eyes, which will be particularly challenging to paint. Some people go with a magical swirl of color for the swoosh, while others go with shades of blue and silver like the sickle is cutting the air. Ultimately, pick whatever you think looks cool and go with it. Here's one way you could paint your models, and here's another, thanks to our friend David Spencer. I'll take a brief moment now to thank all those who were patrons at the time this video was made, especially Griff, Suttergay, Tom, Alan, Jeremy, Mikolai, Oleg, and Travis, and many more at the free student tier. Your support is essential to bringing these videos to life. Now that we've explored everything else in the box, let's get to the models. The Grimm keyword models were introduced in the Malifaux Burns rulebook, so refer to that book for the lore and stories that go along with this crew. All 4 models have the Grimm keyword, so as long as range, line of sight, and other rules are satisfied, any ability or action that refers to a friendly Grimm model can be applied to any of them. If their cards are updated through the errata, you can always get the most current cards through the Malifaux Crew Builder app or from the resources page on the Wyrd website. Klaus Norwood is the henchman who leads this crew. As a henchman, he is the only one of the Grimm models eligible to use soulstones. You'll notice that in addition to the Grimm keyword, he also has the Mimic keyword of Lucius Matheson and certain other models. Certain abilities and actions will refer to friendly Mimic models, and this means Klaus can be one of them. The first ability on Klaus's card is Dark Tail, which is shared among all 4 Grimm keyword models. This says that when a friendly Grimm model ends its activation within a 6-inch aura of Klaus, he gains Shielded +1 for every enemy model damaged during that activation. If a red cap smacks two enemy models during its activation, damaging them both, and ends its activation within 6 inches of Klaus, Klaus gains shielded +2. The cooler part is that since this is an aura, and auras affect their sources, this ability applies to Klaus as well. So when Klaus ends his activation, he gains shielded +1 for every model he damaged during his own activation. This ability is on every Grimm model, so there is benefit to keeping them close to one another when the fighting begins. The next ability Klaus has is Disguised. This says he cannot be targeted by actions generated by the Charge action. Charge is a special two-part action that lets you push your model and then opt to take a melee attack action. Other models can push up to Klaus, but they can't make the attack against him because he's disguised. Some models have abilities that let them use projectile attacks as part of a charge. With the way Disguised is worded, Klaus cannot be targeted by those attacks either. Infiltrator is a sneaky ability. Some game effects will say they affect or target only enemy models. When they do, Klaus is not considered an enemy model. At the same time, other game effects are restricted to friendly only or to a specific keyword. If these game effects are coming from an enemy model, Klaus can choose to be affected by those if he wants to. Let's look at an example. Let's say the Grimm crew is facing off against the Jockey keyword from the Bayou starter box. Ruffles runs up to Klaus with one movement, and then uses his beak attack since he can't target Klaus with the attack from the charge action. We'll say Ruffles wins the duel and does 2 damage to Klaus, but when Ruffles tries to use the pecking order trigger that would give him a soul stone, Klaus's infiltrator ability says he's not considered an enemy model, and the trigger has no effect. Both Klaus and Ruffles are within 5 inches of Bo Peep, the Jockey crew leader. Her "and the crowd goes wild" ability says that friendly models that end their activation within 8 inches of Bo Peep heal 1 for each other model damaged during their activations. Consequently, Ruffles heals 1. When Klaus activates, he uses incessant questioning on both Ruffles and Bo Peep, flipping cards and doing 1 damage to each of them. When he ends his activation within Bo Peep's "and the crowd goes wild" aura, he heals 2, since he counts as a friendly model when he wants to, and he damaged 2 other models during his activation. Because you cannot count on your opponent to keep reminding you of abilities and actions on her cards that would apply to Klaus, it is in your best interest to download your opponent's cards into your Crew Builder app so you can review them while you both play. Face in the Crowd is another ability that protects Klaus. If he's within 3 inches of any other model when he is targeted by a projectile attack, he gains cover. Normally, you get cover when you're near buildings and blocking terrain, and it gives Klaus +1 to his defense stat in the duel against the projectile attack. If the attack succeeds, it then puts a negative modifier on the damage flip. It doesn't matter which direction the attack is coming from, only that Klaus is within 3 inches of another model. Lastly, Klaus has the "which one is real" ability that forces your opponent to discard a card when Klaus activates each turn. You don't get to pick the card, but it's a cool ability nonetheless. On the back of Klaus's card, you'll see the Sharp Wit attack, which gives him a 1-inch engagement range. This attack has a stat 6 and is resisted by willpower, and it does no damage, but gives the slow condition. If you get a tome in the duel, you can declare the Cryptic Message trigger, which causes a 2-inch pulse centered on the target model. Friendly models, that is, models in Klaus's crew, within that 2-inch range, gain shielded +1. If you get a crow in the duel, you can declare the Pocketful of Personalities trigger, and you'll really want to know what's on your opponent's stat card for this one. If you're not using the app, just ask to see the card. It is far better to know what triggers are on your target's card and plan on these effects than to declare the trigger and find out that the target doesn't have anything useful. This trigger lets Klaus take a trigger from the targeted model's melee attacks and use it now as if it were printed on his card and he just flipped that suit in the duel. For example, say Klaus successfully used Sharp Wit against Bo Peep and got the Pocketful of Personalities trigger. Bo Peep's only melee attack has 2 triggers, so Klaus could choose Hogwash Slosh to place Bo Peep anywhere within 2 inches of himself, or Rampage to push himself 5 inches through Bo Peep, forcing her to make a movement duel or else take 1 damage. Incessant Questioning is also resisted with willpower and has a 6-inch range, but is not a projectile attack. This does 1, 3, or 4 points of damage and gives the target the staggered condition. The only trigger, Get In There, comes from a mask and lets Klaus choose a minion in his crew that is within line of sight of the target to push up to 3 inches toward the target of this attack. It doesn't matter how far away that minion is from the target, as long as they can see each other. The third attack action is also a bonus action, which means Klaus can use it only once per activation. Press for Information has a 6-inch range and also has a stat 6, but has a target number of 12, so you need to flip or cheat in a 6 or better to make it happen. Like the rest of Klaus's attacks, the target resists with willpower. Also note that this attack must target an enemy model. There are sometimes reasons you may want to attack members of your own crew, but you can't use Press for Information to do it. When you declare this attack, you name one of the 4 suits. Technically, you do this before the duel, which may mean your opponent knows what suit to hold on to. If you succeed in this attack, your opponent must make a choice. Either discard a card with the suit you named, or take 3 damage. If you get a tome in the duel, you can declare the Draw Out Secrets trigger, which lets you drop a Neverborn scheme marker in base contact with the targeted model. The only tactical action on the card is Information Exchange. There is no duel required for this, and Klaus can use it only once per turn. This lets Klaus swap out a card in his hand for one in the discard pile. You have to discard a card first, and then the card you draw from the discard pile has to match that suit. Obviously, you cannot take this action if your control hand is empty, and you can't use it to draw either of the jokers out of your discard pile. The next Grim model is Hildegard, the Enforcer. Take note that while she is Neverborn versatile, she does not have the Mimic keyword like Klaus does. She does have both the Dark Tail and Face in the Crowd abilities that Klaus does, and they work in the same way. Entrancing is an ability that means enemy models gain no positive modifiers from the focused condition during opposed duels with Hildegard or other members of her crew who are within 3 inches of her. This doesn't mean the enemy model must be within 3 inches of Hildegard to be affected. It's more about the target of the duel. Check this out. Harris J5 is here, this Gearling is here, and the other Gearling is here, engaged with a red cap. All 3 Arcanist models have the focused +2 condition. When Klaus attacks Harris J5 with Incessant Questioning, J5 can lower his focus to gain a positive modifier with no problem because the opposed duel doesn't involve Hildegard, and Klaus is outside that 3-inch aura. Later, when the Gearling attacks Hildegard with its Timekeeper's tools, it can lower its focus condition if it wants, but it gains no positive modifier due to Hildegard's ability. If the Arcanist player says he's going to do this, it would be polite for the Neverborn player to remind the Arcanist that it won't make a difference and to save it for later, unless that player has some other reason for lowering the condition. It'll be the same situation when the red cap attacks the other Gearling later on. If the Gearling tries to lower its focused condition to gain a positive modifier to resist the puppet's attack, it won't help it at all because it's an opposed duel with a model friendly to Hildegard and within 3 inches of her. Hildegard's last ability is unique to her. Infatuation takes effect at the start of Hildegard's activation, so as soon as you say you're activating her, but before she takes any of her actions. If a master or henchman model friendly to her, meaning in her crew, is within 6 inches of her when she activates, she gets to draw a card. The second part of this ability says that if Klaus Norwood is within 6 inches of her when she activates, either she or Klaus can heal too. If Klaus Norwood is the model that fulfills both of these conditions, he's the henchman near her when she activates, she can still draw a card before choosing which of them gets to heal. Just remember that you cannot heal above a model's maximum health, and she cannot split the healing, so she heals 1 and Klaus heals 1. One of them gets to heal, or not at all. Unassuming Demeanor gives Hildegard a 1-inch engagement range, but is resisted by willpower when she uses it. If she succeeds in the attack, the target suffers 1, 2, or 3 damage, but the cool thing is that she can treat all negative modifiers to the damage flip as positive modifiers. So you probably want to win by as narrow a margin as possible, maybe even cheating a card that matches your opponent's total to get the double negative modifier, which would then turn positive, letting you flip 3 cards for the damage flip and choosing any of them you want. Keep in mind that it's the suit of the card in the duel that allows you to choose a trigger, and this attack has 2 of them. A crow gives, "Ah, my eye!" which increases the damage by 1 and pushes the target up to 3 inches away from Hildegard. Since this is a push, it cannot go around corners and must be in a straight line. A ram gives the Making Conversation trigger, which lets a friendly model within 3 inches heal 2. This is within 3 inches of the target model and does not say other friendly model, so could be applied to heal Hildegard herself. Her other attack action is also her bonus action, so she can use it only once per activation. Take by the Hand comes with a stat 5 and a target number of 11, so she must flip or cheat in a 6 or better to make it work. If she succeeds, she pushes the target up to 3 inches in any direction, and then pushes herself up to 3 inches toward the target. A crow in the duel gives her the Unrequited Love trigger, which can be used only on an enemy model, but doesn't affect the target. You choose another enemy model in the target's line of sight, and that model gains Distracted +1. If Hildegard successfully used Take by the Hand on this gearling, she could push the gearling 3 inches toward herself, and then push herself 3 inches toward the gearling to engage it. The crow would then let her pick Harris J5, which is within the gearling's line of sight, to gain Distracted +1, even though he's pretty far away. Alternatively, she can target a friendly minion, like the red cap models that come in the starter box, pushing it and herself normally. If she gets a mask in the duel when she pushes the friendly minion, she gets the Wicked Waltz trigger, which then lets that minion take a melee attack action if it winds up within range to do so. Hildegard's tactical action is a 6-inch pulse centered on her base. Like Take by the Hand, Sweet Song has a stat 5 and a target number of 11, needing a 6 to succeed. The action itself has no effect on friendly models, but enemy models within the 6-inch pulse must pass a target number 13 movement duel, or else push 4 inches towards Hildegard. The mask attached to the stat guarantees the Jealousy trigger, regardless of the suit of the card she flips in the duel. If she declares it, enemy models within 1 inch of her suffer 1 damage every time Hildegard reduces the value of her shielded condition. Since the Dark Tail ability can give her shielded every time she, Klaus, or each red cap ends its activation near her, she can potentially keep her shielded condition fairly strong and keep dealing damage. If she gets a ram in the duel for Sweet Song, she can instead declare the Bolster Strength trigger, which heals all friendly models within 6 inches of her. Despite the free mask in the stat, you can declare only 1 trigger. Lastly, we have the 2 red cap minions. You'll see that they have a hiring limit of 2, so even if you buy another starter box with 2 more red caps, you aren't allowed to have more than 2 in a crew at a time. These little guys have both the Grim and Puppet keywords, so can be hired into any crew whose leader has either of them. Since they are constructs, they'll drop scrap markers if they're killed, so make sure you have a couple of those on hand. Like all the Grim models, the red caps have the Dark Tail ability to gain the shielded condition, which is pretty likely given the rest of their abilities and actions. They also have Armor +1, which reduces all damage they suffer by 1, but cannot reduce damage to 0. The Rush ability increases the range of their charge. When you declare the charge action, you first push your movement stat in a straight line. For the red caps, that's 5 inches. The Rush ability adds 2 inches to that, letting them push 7 inches before making an optional melee attack. Just remember you can take the charge action only once per activation. Bloody Cloth can also be used only once per activation and lets a red cap reduce its shielded condition by 1 to add a ram to its duel. If the puppet doesn't have shielded before the duel, It has nothing to reduce and can't really use this ability, but remember that the cryptic message trigger on Klaus Norwood's Sharp Wit attack can give models shielded. Since it has only one action with any triggers, this is meant to be used along with the red cap's huge sickle, so let's look at that. The huge sickle gives the red cap a 1-inch engagement range and does 1, 2, or 3 points of damage. If the red cap targets a model that is engaged by another friendly model, meaning another member of the red cap's crew, the red cap gains shielded +1 after succeeding in the attack. If it has a ram in the duel, whether from flipping it, cheating it, or from its Bloody Cloth ability, it can declare the critical strike trigger, which increases the damage by 1 for each ram in the duel. This means if you have a ram on the card you use in the duel, that's 1. If you add a ram from the Bloody Cloth ability, that's a second ram for a total of +2 damage. You can still use the 1 ram from Bloody Cloth regardless of what you flipped though. If the red cap is within 3 inches of an enemy scheme marker, it can use its bonus action, Trail of Gore. This removes the enemy scheme marker and lets the red cap take either the walk action or another swing with its huge sickle. You cannot walk away from enemy engagement, so it can't get you away from enemy models. But if you were to charge in and attack a model with one action, swing again with the huge sickle for another action, and then use Trail of Gore to get another attack, the little puppet could do 10 points of damage or more on its activation if your flips and triggers are right. Not too shabby. Now that you understand how your models work together, practice playing a simplified game. This format also works very well in your friendly local game store for demo games. Set the table with a normal amount of terrain as described in the core rulebook and also in video 301. Each player claims one standard deployment zone, which is an even strip across one side of the playing area 8 inches from the table edge. It doesn't matter who goes first or sets their models on the table first, as long as no part of any model's base extends beyond the deployment zone. Watch all the videos in the 100 and 200 series so you have a grasp of the fundamentals before you play. Be sure to have corpse and scrap markers, as your models will likely drop one or the other of these when they are killed. Some models also use them for special effects. Lastly, you'll need pass tokens to either skip activating a model as the balance of the game shifts, or to pay for other special game effects depending on your crew. With that said, you'll play a full game of 5 turns, but with only 4 models in each crew, it won't take that long. You can play at just 25 soulstones, which will be all the models in your starter box, or you can play at 30 soulstones, which gives you a few extra for an upgrade or two and some soulstones left over for your soulstone pool. You might want to wait until your second or third game before adding in upgrades and soulstones, and for your first game, just focus on the abilities, actions, and basic game mechanics. You may also have learned that in games of a certain size, the crew leader gets to take 3 actions and a bonus action. That size is 50 soulstones. So at this 25 or 30 soulstone level, all models, even the crew leader, will take just 2 actions and a bonus action. Like regular games, there is no scoring victory points in turn 1. In turns 2 through 5, each player can score victory points in 2 ways: kill an enemy model, or place a scheme marker into base contact with a piece of terrain that is on the enemy half of the table. You'll have to remove the scheme marker to score the point, but in this simplified game, you can score as many victory points as you're eligible each turn. If you kill one enemy model anywhere on the table, and then remove 2 scheme markers that you had placed next to terrain on the enemy side of the table, then you'd score 3 victory points that turn. At the end of the 5th turn, count up all your victory points and see who won. Be sure to show good sportsmanship and shake hands with your opponent after your game. After a few beginning games like this, look into the Henchman Hardcore format in Gaining Grounds and take your game to the next level. That's the overview of the Neverborn Starter Box. Pick up a printable set of all the markers and tokens you need to play Malifaux in the Wargames Vault. If you haven't already, join our Patreon for early, ad-free access to all new content. And be sure to visit the Malifaux University gift shop for the latest in Malifaux-themed shirts, hoodies, drinkware, and more. Links are in the notes below. And remember, play friendly games, keep it simple, and have fun.